on this computer. All right, so somehow it's going to record on this computer. Okay, Barney.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody to session 2 of our series on resources available through the library and elsewhere for the amateur genealogist. I'm happy to say we're making progress. Session 1, my colleagues were all, and I were all confined in our home. Today, some of us are actually within the same 4 walls of the building, so that's good news. We're progressing and slowly getting to reopening. Anyway, welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk primarily about 3 databases that are accessible and that are used fairly frequently and are good for both beginners as well as advanced genealogy fans. We're going to talk about Ancestry.com, which is a subscription database accessible normally only in our library. However, during the current pandemic, restrictions have been relaxed, so it can be accessed from home as well. We'll also discuss Heritage Quest, and we'll talk about Family Search as well. So let's move along. And I am now going to switch over and try to do some live work with Ancestry, and we're going to talk really about some of the very, very basic functions and features of Ancestry.com. So bear with me, and let's hope the technology works and cooperates. Okay, so accessing Ancestry.com. You're all seeing my Syosset Library homepage?
No, I'm seeing Ancestry.
You're seeing Ancestry, okay. Let's see. This is the screen. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to start sharing my library homepage. There we go. You should have the Syosset Library homepage now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I just learned something. When I tab from window to window, it doesn't change what I'm sharing. So here we are. To access Ancestry from our homepage, you go here to Research, and you would scroll down the page to Articles and Databases. I'm going to skip that for 1 second and go one more to Recommended Websites, just so you're aware of it. If I click on Recommended Websites and scroll down the page to Genealogy, you'll see that we have links to currently 32 different websites that you can access and that you can utilize in your research. The recommended websites page are websites that we have looked at, we've used, we're comfortable with the content that you'll find on these sites in terms of reliability, repeatability, and just overall access. So I just want you to be aware of that. We're really not going to go too much into the websites today. We might further look at them at some of the subsequent sessions. But for now, let's go back to Articles and Databases. And here you will see our genealogy link. Click on that. And here we have links to Ancestry Library Edition and Heritage Quest. And again, you'll note that typically it's available in the library only, but right now you can access it from home. So let's head over to Ancestry Library Edition. Excuse me. And here we are on the Ancestry homepage. What you'll find here on the homepage are quick links to various resources, databases, public member trees, birth and marriage, death records, etc. I'm going to close my emails out. You'll also see access to census records, and you'll see across the top some tabs which are useful. You have a search tab, which will take you to various categories. You have message boards that are accessible. Go back. You have the Learning Center, which is a good place to go if you're starting and you're not quite sure where to begin. And this gives you some basic information about various databases, getting started, census records, beyond the basics, just general categories that might be helpful as you're doing your research. There's also a maps link, which will take you to regional specific resources. Charts and forms for some basic creation of a really simple family tree chart, a research calendar. Charts really to keep your materials in order and to manage your research. The new collections tab is also useful. It will show you the various databases that are accessible through the product, and will give you an idea of when they've been updated and how current they might be. So they're always adding materials to these, and you can get an idea of when things have been updated. These are new databases that have just been added. These indicate that they've been updated, and that's useful also. You can always go back and see a database that you might have searched previously and take a look and see if there's been anything added to it. For now, let's go back to the home button, and for a beginner who's not sure where to start, they might look at this tab and say, okay, begin searching. We click on it, and it leads us to a search bar. There are listed on the right some specific collections that you can search into, but for now, let's pretend that we don't know anything, we don't know where to start. And I'm going to say, let's take a look and see if we can find any information about my grandma. And I know her name. I'm not certain of her date of birth, but let's see if we find anything about Adelina Felice, my maternal grandma. I do a search, and I've come up with almost 37,000 results. So let's see if we can find something a little more specific. Adelina DeFelice, the name's not identical. Adelina DeFelice, DeFelice, DeFelice. And we're scrolling down, and here we see an Adelina Felice. I'm suspicious of this one right off the bat because I don't think my grandma ever lived in Santa Clara, California, or anywhere in California. So I'm going to skip that, and the one that jumps out at me is the one right below it because it mentions her spouse, Carmelo Bombara, who was my grandfather. So now I'm sure that this is my grandma's record. And it's telling me here, it's giving me a link to a New York City marriage license. It gives me some basic information, and it gives me the opportunity to view it. So let's take a quick look. And here's the document that they're sending me to. Let's see if I can zoom in on it a little bit. And on this side, on the right side are the brides, on the left sides are the grooms. I'm searching for my grandmother, and I'm scrolling down, up, and there it is. Oops, sorry to make you dizzy. We have Felice Adelina, that's my grandma. It gives me the record number, and it's telling me that this marriage license was issued on November 15th of 1920. And there we go. So a little bit, again, a very basic search for my grandma. I can also click on my grandfather, and it links me back to the same marriage license. So let's go back.
Barney, can I jump in 1 sec just with something?
Absolutely.
That record you just looked at, just for people that might not be aware, but since it has the certificate number on there, that if it's possible the more expanded record may be online somewhere, but if it's not, it still exists. Unfortunately, it's somewhere you have to go in person, which right now is a little difficult. But once we get hopefully to the point where things will open back up, there's the because this is in New York City, at the Municipal Archives, which is in downtown Manhattan, they have all these records there on like microfilm. And once you have that certificate number, they have an index that helps you. You can actually find it on the those old microfilm machines. But the nice thing about it is that when you have the full marriage certificate record, it'll very likely have the names of their parents on there, and possibly where they came from. It might even have something more specific than just Italy. It might actually say the name of the town. So that can be really helpful in finding, going back a generation. If you can get to those records, you can get, you know, the next generation back if you didn't know that yet. So that can be, you know, once we get to a point where you can go do that again, it's something I highly recommend doing.
Also, you know, on the marriage records, here on the license, it wouldn't show it, but if you find the actual record of the marriage itself, you might see the witnesses who were
Right.
present at the marriage, which might also lead you to more information, more relatives, another branch of the family that you may not have been aware of.
And the building where they have those records is the it's called the Surrogates Court building, and that's where the municipal archives are held. It's downtown on way downtown on Chambers Street, right near City Hall. And I recommend for anybody, you know, that's really interested in, I highly recommend going there in person, just because it's a really beautiful, it's a beautiful building to just visit, aside from the records that they have there, which they have a lot of good stuff there too.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to go back now and actually maybe point back to something that Chris just mentioned. Here I'm back to the search page, and I found my grandma and my grandfather on the marriage license. But as I'm scrolling through these special collections, a couple of them jump out at me, and particularly here's land records. So let me take a look. I know that my grandparents owned property in Brooklyn, as well as in Nassau and Suffolk County. So I'm going to just do a quick search and see if we can find any of their property records. I'm going to use my grandfather's last name. I'm not putting anything else in, just to keep it as a very, very broad search. And here I have 260 results. And as I'm scrolling down, I'm not seeing their name. And I'm looking at the locations, and I'm seeing Minnesota, Michigan, U.S. land records, more. Nothing really coming up with anything local to them in New York. And the moral of that story, if I go back and I look to the records that are available, oh, I gotta find it.
Could the spelling be different?
Pardon me?
Could the spelling be different than what they have listed?
The spelling could be different, but more to the point is that if I look here on the featured catalogs, the only New York State record are extradition requisitions and mandate registers, and they're not in there. And the point is that not everything is going to necessarily be accessible online. The New York land records are not included in the Ancestry database. So you can hunt and hunt and hunt, but you're not going to find records of deeds and real estate transactions through Ancestry. As Chris was saying, some of these things require trips down to the offices. That's the kind of a search that you'd have to do at the county clerk's office, where the land records are maintained in New York State. There are records for some states that you'll find. Maine has some information on here. There are other records here, but the New York State records, if that's what you're looking for, you will not find through Ancestry. Just something, as I said, to point out that not everything will show up every time you're doing these searches. There's legwork involved, and there's visiting of municipal offices oftentimes. So let's go back to the Ancestry homepage. And I'm now going to also go back to our library homepage. And I'm going to take a little bit of a look now at Heritage Quest. We've mentioned Heritage Quest a couple of times in our prior session. And there's sometimes not a lot to talk about with Heritage Quest. It does have materials in it, but if you take a look at it, it is an Ancestry product. And if you compare now the Heritage Quest homepage, excuse me, with the Ancestry homepage, you'll see that they're almost identical. They use the same picture. They use the same language. Let's get back to Heritage Quest. I'm sorry, I've got bars up here that are blocking me. So you see it's very, very similar. It again refers you to census records. It has some broad search categories on the home page. You also have some links here to search, research aids. If you'll notice, or if you recall from the Ancestry page, they're very, very similar. Getting started, census beyond the basics. If we go back to Heritage Quest, and bear with me while I rotate back. Sorry. Okay. Research aids on Heritage Quest, you'll see that they're almost the same categories. They even use the same illustrations. So the products are really very, very similar. And now my Heritage Quest here is freezing up on me. So bear with me a second. Sorry. Oops, sorry again. Okay, back to Heritage Quest. And let's go back to their homepage. Again, for the beginner, if you logged onto our website and you came to Heritage Quest and you weren't really sure where to go, you'd go to the Begin Searching tab. And one of the things that I find really, really strange about this product is when you hit Begin Searching, there's no search bar. So for somebody who's really a beginner, it takes them from one page with no search bar to another page with no particular search bar. And they're left trying to figure out, okay, where do I start? How do I begin? In contrast, Ancestry, on their Begin Searching, as simple as it may be, at least gives the beginner a starting point and a place to go. So I really think that's it's kind of a minor point, but I think it's really a drawback on the Heritage Quest product. Beyond that, they're very, very similar. They lead you to very similar databases, and they're both products of Ancestry. So the differences are really not significant, and your search results are probably going to be similar. I didn't actually do the search for my grandma on Heritage Quest, and my computer is now again not letting me back to Heritage Quest. Let's see. So again, if you start with Heritage Quest, I guess you could. My recommendation, though, would be to really go through Ancestry. There may be some minor materials that you could find here that you wouldn't find on Ancestry, but between the two products, I would kind of point to Ancestry. Okay, now, the next product we were really going to take a look at today was Family Search, and I'm going to kind of hand off the screen to Ed, who's more particularly got a lot to say about Family Search. And let me figure out how to do this. I'm going to go to Stop Share, and we're all back.
Okay. What I thought we would do is actually do a search starting with Ancestry and then moving to Family Search, so you can see what records one might have versus the other and how we get to an endpoint. But one of the things that Barney had on his PowerPoint slide, which I'll talk you through, is the fact that Family Search every now and then will send me an email. You have to sign up, but it's free. You just create an account and it'll give me a tidbit like, oh, you might want to look at this person because he or she may be a great-grandparent. And I would say that most of the time I already know the information that they do send, possibly because I've actually done that search on their website. But every now and then they come up with something a little bit new, and they actually came up with my great uncle's World War I draft card or draft registration. And I knew it was him because it had his wife's name on it. He had lived in Illinois. He'd moved to Chicago. So it had that and had a little more information as well. So every now and then they throw something out at you which you may not have, which to me is a good thing. And it prompts you to search elsewhere with the information that you have. So I'm going to try to share my screen with you now and see if this works. Share. Okay, and you should have something that says census and voter lists.
Yep.
Everybody there? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a search for Catherine Joyce. She was born in 1931 in New York City. I know that. Her father's name is Michael Joyce, and he was born somewhere around 1893 in Ireland. Her mother was Catherine McLaughlin, and she was born around 1890 in Ireland. She's got an aunt, Ellen McLaughlin, who's Catherine's sister, her mother's sister, born in 1876 in Ireland. And I have this information through findagrave.com, which is a website we'll go over in another session. And then I also know that she's got a brother, Thomas Joyce, who was born in New York, but I really don't know when. So what I've done in Ancestry is I said Catherine Joyce, born 1931, New York, USA. I didn't narrow it down to New York City, figuring maybe I get better results with a broader category. She lived in New York City, I knew that. Her father is Michael Joyce. Her mother is Catherine McLaughlin. She's got a sibling, Thomas. And I also put in that she was female. And I've been having trouble with Ancestry, but let's see if it actually does the search. Yes. Okay, so it shows that we have 3,779 potential hits. By the way, just by knocking out that female criteria, it knocked it up to about 3,800 and some odd. So as you can see, there's a 1930 census, which we know she can't be in if she was born in 1931, another 1930 census. If I keep on going, there's a 1940 census, but if I look at that and scroll down, can I do that here? Let's see if I get that and scroll down. We know this is not the same person. This is a Catherine Joyce, but none of the other relatives are the same. And we know that she can't be in the 1930 census because she was born in 1931. So what we're really doing is trying to look for her in the 1940 census. I didn't do any exact searches. I can move these criteria around and make it more exact if I want. Let's see what I did. So I actually moved this a little bit, making it a little bit more exact. USA, New York, I moved a little over here to see what happens. And I'll update it and see if I get anything better. And again, I'm getting 1930 censuses. Here's a 1931 census, 1940 census, which again is probably the same one we saw before. So needless to say, I have not been able to find Catherine Joyce in the 1940 census in Ancestry.com, and that would be the only one that she would be in. If you look at some of the other results from the 3,700, I got a Catherine Joyce who was in Rochester. I got a Catherine M. Joyce. So I'm not getting the people that I want to get. If I go down to all categories though, maybe that'll give me something. And here I actually got lucky because the first one shows Catherine Joyce, born January 9th, 1931. So if I click on that, it tells me that she was born 1931 in New York City, and I can actually view the register to show that she is indeed over here. So now I know that at least I verified the fact that she was born on January 9th, 1931. So what I thought I'd do now is, since I'm not getting anything for the 1940 census, I thought I'd try Family Search. And what I did over here, are you with me on Family Search? It's showing up on the screen?
Yep.
Okay, so I did Catherine Joyce. I know that she was born in New York, 1931. I knew she lived in New York, so I'm going to say, just for argument's sake, that she lived there from 1931 to 1980. And if I scroll down, again, I have her parents as Michael Joyce and Catherine McLaughlin. So let me see what happens when I do that. So here I'm getting a Catherine M. Joyce, but we know from the birth index that it's Catherine J. Joyce, so that doesn't work. There's an M. Catherine Joyce, that's not her. There's a Catherine Joyce who immigrated in 1954, but since she was born in the United States, we know that that's not her. So what I thought I would do is, oh, by the way, in replicating this one, I got 442 hits. In trying to do this a couple of weeks ago, I got 828 hits. I probably did something slightly different. And when I did this the other day, I got 449 hits. So the fact that you're not getting the same number of hits every time means that you should probably go back and look at what you are seeing so that maybe something else came along. If I decide to make Catherine and Joyce exact, and if I move down and get, if I make Michael exact as well, and her mother Catherine exact, and then I scroll down and update, I'm not getting anything. So that didn't help me too much. So what I decided to do then was go back to Ancestry and see whether I could do something with her father. And maybe that would help us out a little bit. So if I go back to here, hopefully this is going to work. Okay, so let me try Michael Joyce. So I'm going to use Michael Joyce. And you don't have to capitalize. I'm going to say he was born in 1893, but since I don't know the exact year, I'm going to say plus or minus 2 years. And I'm going to put Galway, Ireland, because I do know that. So for purposes of this, we'll try that. We know that he lived in New York. And I like the fact that it prompts you to pick one. So New York. What else have I done? If I scroll down a little bit further, we know that his spouse was Catherine McLaughlin. By the way, I did this once and I forgot the last E on Catherine and I got totally different responses. So spelling counts, I guess, in this case. And I'll make him male and see what happens. Okay, so over here, the first item that we see is a 1930 census. He lives in New York and he arrived around 1915, and that I do know, so I'm gonna assume that this is the person and click on him. And as I scroll down, I see a Michael J. Joyce, a Catherine Joyce, Thomas, which I know is my Catherine's brother, Ella McLaughlin, which we know is Catherine's sister, and somebody else. So just by looking at this page alone, without going into the actual census, we see that Michael was born in, where did I see that? Around 1894, up here. We know he's married. He is the head of the house. He lives on West 104th Street. He's renting. He was naturalized in 1915. He is naturalized as of 1930, but he arrived in 1915. He can speak English. He's a chauffeur, and he's employed. If I go and actually click on the census information, what's nice about Ancestry is it typically highlights the census, and I'm just going to, I was going to increase the size of it, but I don't know if I can. But what we can find out from the census is that he's the head of the house. Catherine is his wife. Thomas J. is his son. Ella McLaughlin, who's actually Catherine's sister, and Frank Farrell are roomers. I guess they're boarders in the house. Michael was 35 and Catherine was 37 when they got married. So they've been married about a year at the time that the census was taken. So they were married somewhere between 1928 and 1930. And the census was taken in April of 1930. When I scroll over to the right, we also find out that Michael, Catherine, and Ella were born in the south of Ireland, and Thomas and Frank were born in New York. Their parents were born in the south of Ireland, and they arrived in New York as follows. And that's, the arrival date is somewhere around over here. So Michael came in 1915, Catherine came in 1910, and Ella came in 1898. And the difference between, age difference between Catherine and Ella makes that sound reasonable. And they were all naturalized. Michael has a job as a chauffeur. Catherine doesn't have a job. Ella is a cook in a private family. And Frank is actually the assistant curator at the Museum of Natural History. So this gives you a lot more information than just that summary sheet. And I highly recommend that you go and look at that as well as the summary sheet, dig into the actual document itself. So now that we've seen the 1930 census, why don't we try for the 1920 census? And you can go down and as you saw, you can pick the census year that you want. And I'm going to pick the 1920 Federal Census. And since he came to the country in 1915, he could definitely be in the 1920 census. But let me go back a minute. So if I pick the 1920 censuses, the first one, he arrived in 1902. That's not him. Maybe we'll try this one. Michael Joyce arrived in 1915, and he lived on 58th Street. And we see that there are a lot of people living in this particular house. So it could be that it's a rooming house or an apartment or something like that. But there is a Michael Joyce here. So why don't we try by looking at the actual census document to see if there's any more information that we can get on Michael. And here's Michael Joyce. He's a roomer. He's single, which we know because we know he got married sometime between 1928 and 1930. He arrived in 1915. His naturalization papers were submitted. And if you go up on the top, you can see that the actual census was taken, where did I see that? Sometime in February. Oh, here. So sometime between February 3rd and February 5th was the actual date that this census was taken. And we also know that our Michael was born in Ireland. He also is a chauffeur. So from all appearances, it looks like we do have the right Michael. So we've gotten a little more information. And the next thing I thought I would do is go to all categories. and maybe look at the death information, birth, marriages, and death. And we've been pretty lucky so far. So let's try death and burial. Okay. Here's one. I can't see the whole thing because I have all the people listening over to the side, but this Michael was born in 1893. He died in 1967 in Amity, New York. And I happen to know that that's true. So we were very lucky this time that he came up first. And what we found out from this, is that he was born in 1893. He died in 1967. His death place was New York. His cemetery is the Gates of Heaven Cemetery. Hawthorne, where he was buried is Hawthorne, Westchester County, New York. And his spouse was Catherine Joyce. And then it shows a little picture of the headstone of him. And if I go over to here and I click on this brings me to findagrave.com, which I said we'll go over in another session. But now you can see the actual picture of his headstone. Sometimes you can actually get a bigger picture of it. So he was aged somewhere between 73 and 74. And it tells you the section number and the plot and the grave. With findagrave.com, people can add grave sites to find a grave. And some people do it not because they're necessarily related to the person, that's just something that they do. And so we do have the section of plot number if you ever wanted to go and find out about this person. And it also shows that Catherine McLaughlin Joyce was his spouse. So now we've got a bit more information about him. And let's see if I can get back out of this. Okay, I need to. Okay, the other thing that they have is the New York State Death Index. And if I scroll down, here's the Social Security Death Index, which again, we don't have the original document, but we have the information with his Social Security number, his actual date of birth. It was issued in New York, and actually his last residence was Greenwood Lake, Orange County, and he died in January of 1967. There was the New York State Index as well, and I don't know if I can find it. When did he die? Yeah, for some reason I don't have it on this time, but again, everything changes, and you should definitely keep on going back and forth to see if you can find something new. I tried to do some other searches for Michael. I tried the 1925 census and I couldn't find him. And I also could not find any marriage information about Michael. So we thought now we'd go to Family Search and try Michael again on Family Search and see what we come up with. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.
Did you go to any of the military records? I don't know if that was useful. I would imagine men of a certain age and generation, like my late father-in-law was a World War II veteran, so there are records for people like that that provide information.
Well, I'm actually going to do that in Family Search, and so I'll get to that in a moment. So Michael Joyce, his birthplace was Galway, Ireland. We know now that he was born in 1893, so that's exact. Whereas in Ancestry, it says exact for the dates or plus or minus 1 year, 2 year, 5 years. They don't have that for the dates here. They only have that for names. Okay, he lived in New York from 1915 to 1967. Get rid of a father's name. Get rid of a mother's name. We can go up and put in a spouse, though. All right, marriage. We know it was in New York, and we know it was, let's say, from 1928 to 1930. And let me just see if I did any other criteria here. Oh, and we also know that he died in Orange County, New York in 1967. Whoops. And let's see what this gives us. So we update our search. And here we have a Michael Joyce head of house, well, for 1940. But when I scroll down, it's not the Michael Joyce that we want. And you're gonna find a lot of that. I mean, there are probably a lot of Michael Joyces who emigrated in around 1915 from Ireland. So what I thought I'd do is go to the collections that Family Search has. And let's try the 1925 census, New York Census. So I'm filtering for those results. And I'm getting Michael Joyce, which we had just looked at. That wasn't him. A J.M. Joyce, a Catherine Joyce. So after the first one or two, it's not a Michael Joyce that we want. So what I would do next is try some naturalization records. So if I go back up to the collections, I'm going to get out of that, but I'm going to go back to naturalization, and I'll do the Southern District and Nassau County, New York County, and I'll go back up and try to filter those results and see what happens. And here we have a Michael Joyce who actually was naturalized in 1915, but his birth date is April 2nd. So he's not the one that we want. But here's one. Here's a Michael Joyce whose birthday is July 7th, 1893, which we know is to be right. And this gives us information. He came into New York. His birthplace was Ireland. If you really wanted a certificate number, you could find it. And when you click on the actual document itself, let me make it a little bit bigger so you can see, hopefully. Okay, so Michael Joyce, at the time of this petition for naturalization, and we learned the other day that the process is that there's a declaration for naturalization, your intent to become a citizen, and you have to wait at least 5 years in order to petition for naturalization. So this would be the second step in the process, and then you would actually become a citizen. So at the time that he's petitioning, Michael Joyce lived in Glen Cove. He was a chauffeur. He was born July 7th, 1893 in Ireland. He left Europe in Liverpool on the 16th of November, 1915. And he arrived on the 25th of November, 1915. And he came on the Baltic, which was the ship that he supposedly came on. This is the document number. if you wanted to actually get a certificate number of his naturalization. He's declaring that has no allegiance to King George. He signs it, and it was witnessed by John Michael Kelly, who was a chauffeur, and Thomas R. Walsh, who was a chauffeur. And those names don't mean anything to me as far as his family history goes. And they've known him since February 1st, 1916. The next page is just Michael signing off. So if I go back up here, it should be, oh, whoops, did I go to the wrong image? There should be another page with his signing off on it. But so we got some more information. He came across on the Baltic, the USS Baltic, in November of 1915. Now, the interesting thing when you look at this is the fact that on February 20, whatever, 1920, it says he lives in Glen Cove. But the 1920 census that we looked at originally had a Michael Joyce living in New York City, and that census was taken from February 3rd to February 5th. So that puts in doubt the possibility that that first Michael Joyce is the one that we were looking for, and we might have to look further to see whether there was another Michael Joyce that gave us some more information that we could verify. If I go back so I think you're going to realize from this is that this is a plus and minus type of situation. You find some information that seems to work. You find other information that may contradict it. So I'm going to get rid of these, and I'll show you what the passenger indexes look like, but it's not a very user-friendly situation. It doesn't have a way to narrow down when he came to the United States. If you look at Ancestry, there will be dates of arrival, and you can actually pinpoint certain dates. But in Ancestry, but in Family Search, that really isn't an option anywhere. And if I look through this, take my word for it that there was no immigration of a Michael Joyce born in 1893 that came on the Baltic in November of 1915. So what I ended up doing then is trying to go back and doing some Ancestry information. And if I go back to all categories, I can click on immigration, and I can go through passenger list here. And what this does, if I edit the search, it'll give me arrival dates. So I can put down 1915, and I can make that exact. And New York, if I can spell. And if I hit search, it will give me some information. There are Michael Joyces who arrived from Liverpool. There's one in February of 1915, but there's no Michael Joyce arriving in November of 1915. And I actually did search through Ellis Island's records, and I couldn't find him there as well. And it's my understanding, and I don't know whether anybody else has found this, is when I've looked at naturalization papers and they've actually put a ship name on it, it seems that a lot of times you can't find their names on the ship manifest. So I don't know whether they're just putting the name of any ship, or the way the names were transcribed on the manifests, it might not have been the same name. But I found that in a couple of instances. So I find that to be interesting. So I thought I'd go back to doing family search. You had mentioned some military records. And if I go back to World War I draft, and I filter for those searches, I get a Michael Joyce, who was born on July 7th, 1893. And here's his draft registration. And hopefully it's actually going to show up. Here we go. So we find out that this Michael Joyce lived in Lawrence and this was done in, I think, 1919 or 1917. So in 1917, he lived in Lawrence. In 1920, early 1920s, he lived in Glen Cove. And again, it leaves me to wonder whether that 1920 census, we actually had the right person.
Too bad they didn't have pictures of them, because then you go back in old albums and you would know potentially.
Yes. Yeah, and that would have helped a lot. But I think that was the only Michael Joyce that I can find in the 1920 census. And I have found, and I don't know whether anybody else has found that too, is people drop off of the censuses. I mean, I found some family members in 1900 and 1910, and then I never find them again, or they skip a decade and then I find them in 1930 or 1940. So he was born in County Galway in Ireland. He's a chauffeur. He works for Mr. Earhart in Lawrence. He's single, he's white. It looks like, I don't know whether there are any identifying marks or anything about him. It does talk a little bit about his appearance in the sense that his eyes were gray and his hair was dark and he doesn't have any moles or anything like that. And I guess he's of medium complexion. So we did find out something about him. So I thought that was interesting. Let me get out of this. So we're finding more and more information about him, but it really is a hunt and peck type of thing. If I go back and maybe try World War II, let me get rid of this. Here we have World War II. And this was done in 1942. And they don't have a copy of his actual draft registration on Family Search. So that means we have to go back to Ancestry to do any sort of military type of investigation on him. And why don't I see that? I did have him before. Let me just try all categories.
You know, speaking of photos on the records, there actually is one, it's rare to find, but there is one set of records that do have photos. If you have a relative that was lucky enough to, or well off enough to travel overseas and needed a passport, Ancestry has some records for US passport applications, and those actually did, a lot of them did have photos of the people on there, but those are rare to find though.
Okay, so I'm looking at his military records and I see that there's something called an abstract of World War I military for someone who was registered in Lawrence, New York. So if we click on that, and this is something I had never even heard of, abstract of World War I military service, His service date started in October of 1917. His birth date was about 1893. And when you go to the actual card, okay, he was born in Galway. His age, he's 24 and a quarter. This is done on October 8th, 1917. He was a private. He actually served overseas from April 16th, 1918 to May 6th, 1919. And he was honorably discharged on May 12th, 1919. So another tidbit of information that we found out about him. He lives on Ocean Avenue in Lawrence, which we knew from his draft registration, the actual card itself. And we can also go back and we found his World War II draft registration. Here, again, July 7th. And this shows that as of in World War II, he was living at 212 West 82nd Street. His wife was Catherine Joyce. He worked at Smug's Bar and Grill at 1395 3rd Avenue in New York. So we're getting a little more information about him on that as well. If we go back, let's try some marriage
Did we
records.
lose Ed's audio?
What?
I'm losing you, Ed.
I'm not muted.
Okay, I got you now.
Okay. So if I go back to all categories and we try marriage information, okay, so here's a Michael Joyce. We'll try this one. And this one he was born in 1891, so that's not our Michael Joyce. If we scroll down, we're not finding too much information here. Here's one, nope, Donald. So that's not working all that well for us. I'm trying to find, we did get, I did on my last search actually find his marriage information. And I thought it was on Ancestry, but I am not finding it. Let's try Marriage County Records and see what this does. Yeah, he's the only Michael J. Joyce. Marriage places in Monroe, so it's clearly not this person. Let's see if we can find something in Family Search. New York marriages, why don't we try that and see if that works. Get rid of this. What you'll find is in Family Search, by the way, when you put in marriage records, like you put in Michael Joyce marriage, more than likely you're going to be getting father of the groom as opposed to his own marriage. I don't know why that is. Father of the groom, father of the bride. For some reason, I can't find his marriage record on Ancestry, but I did find it the last time I searched. And you know how we showed Catherine's birth and there was an index and it showed a list of all the people born on that particular day, the Joyces. You get something very, very similar to that for marriage records as well. And it would show Michael Joyce getting married in 1928. So you can see so far we've gone back and forth, but our original goal was to try to find Catherine Joyce, the daughter, in a 1940 census. And since that didn't work for Michael and it didn't work for Catherine herself, why don't we try doing a search for Catherine's mother and see if that works. And she was born, I forget when she was born. I don't remember, let's say 1890, because I don't remember exactly. Galway, Ireland. She lived in New York, USA. Okay, her spouse was Michael Joyce. Child Thomas. And her gender was female. And let's see if this does what I expect it to do. Since I'm only looking for Catherine Joyce in 1940, I'm going to limit it to the 1940 census. And here we go. Here's a Catherine Joyce. That's not the one. We'll try the next one. That's not the one either. I think this might be the one. Nope. All right, I have to find out which one it is because we did finally get it. Give me one more minute. Yes. Oh, nope. Sorry about this. I tried recreating what I did and it didn't work. So let me see if I have this. I put 1894, so let me try that, see if that works. Yes, okay. So here we have the Catherine Joyce that we're looking for. Take my word for it. Her birth year was somewhere around 1896. She's married. They live on West 82nd Street, number 212. And as you scroll down and you see the information, the reason that we couldn't find this under Michael is because in 1940, it was transcribed as Micah Joyce. And Catherine was Joan Joyce. Her name is Catherine Joan Joyce. And in the census, they only put the Joan Joyce part. So you can see that through all of this searching, transcription plays a major role in this as well. If you go back up, there's only one more thing I wanted to talk about. And if I go back to, I think it was all categories. Sometimes you'll see up on top over here, a family tree. And with family trees in Ancestry, some of them are public that you can look at, and some of them are private that won't allow you to look at it. And only if you're a member can you contact the individual who actually put that family tree up. So in the library edition, you can't contact anyone to ask about their family tree because it's just not part of the provisions that we have. And the same thing holds true for family search. You could try to contact some of the people who put up family trees, but you won't necessarily be able to. And a lot of times those family trees don't have a lot of documentation behind them as well. So you're just relying on someone without any sort of census information or marriage records or anything behind that. So I hope I didn't bore you too much, but that's the end of what I have. Barney? Do you want to?
Oh, okay. You want to get me back here? Hold on.
Should I unshare my screen?
Share
There
your
we go.
screen. I only have one more screen. Share. Let me share mine. And, okay, Ed, thank you for that very thorough and interesting presentation. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We will be holding 2 additional sessions as of now, scheduled for Friday, July 17 and Friday, August 14. And we hope that the facilities here will be a little bit more up and running by then, but in the interim, you can access these materials through your library, through our library website from home. And if you have any questions, you can always call us or email us, and we'll be happy to try to help you. And I apologize for the typo that's jumping out at me right now. There we go. Anyway, thanks again for joining us. I hope everybody learned a little bit, and we will see you in July. Thanks a lot.